to the Reason and Theology Show. I'm your host, Michael Lofton. Saturday evening, doing a show. Quick one here before the debate. We have a debate between Dr. Shabir Ali and Louis Dizon, one of our contributors. And they will be debating the crucifixion and the Quran. So Dr. Ali is going to be taking an affirmative position for once. So kind of putting him in a different role than he's normally on when it comes to debates on the show. So this should be interesting. But yeah, I wanted to take at least a few minutes to go over a couple comments that I have about the Second Vatican Council and why I think we need to take it back. And yes, you did hear that correctly. I think we need to take the Second Vatican Council back. We need to stop giving it to the heretics and stop giving it over to the liberals. It's an ecumenical council, for crying out loud. And as Catholics, we can't just ditch an ecumenical council. Now, there have been some ecumenical councils that have been received in maybe a fuller way than others. And there have been some ecumenical councils that were much more impactful than others, of course. But we can't just ditch this thing and just say, I can completely ignore it and it's irrelevant to me. Or worse, attribute heresy to it. And I want to call us to consistency, because as Catholics, especially those who identify as Catholic, but they would have a major problem with the Second Vatican Council. They would even go so far as to say there's heresy in it. I wonder how consistent they really are, because generally what I hear from Catholics who are of that perspective is that, you know, the previous ecumenical councils, they get a check mark next to them. But the Second Vatican Council, no. This is under dispute. And I would say you're being inconsistent at that point. Because as I've noted previously on this show, the Council of Nicaea, as great as it was, did not engage the issue of the Holy Spirit. Now, I understand there's some things surrounding the council, and many of the fathers believe the Holy Spirit was divine. I understand that. I'm saying the council itself did not engage the position of the Holy Spirit and whether or not he is consubstantial with the Father and the Son. It simply passed over that issue in silence because it knew, okay, the issue with Jesus is already going to be under dispute. We're going to have to table that one for later. So it just simply wasn't addressed. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with Nicaea I. I would come to its defense. And here's the thing, though. A traditional Catholic who wants to criticize the Second Vatican Council would also come to the defense of Nicaea I. If I were to raise the objection, but Nicaea I passed over the issue of the Holy Spirit's consubstantiality in silence, here come all of the excuses, and here come all of the arguments in its defense. And that's fine. Okay, I get it. I use those arguments too to defend Nicaea I. But notice what you're doing at that point. Notice how you're now having to make up arguments, or not make up, but you know what I mean. You're having to now present and engage arguments to defend its orthodoxy. And you'll do that for Nicaea I, but you won't do that for Vatican II. And I just wonder why. And it's not just Vatican I. I've noted we have this same problem with Chalcedon and some of the issues that it passed over. The 3 chapters, namely, right? And then the 5th council comes back and says, okay, well, we need to do something else here. You know, not saying Chalcedon was wrong or in heresy. No. But again, you have to at some point start to make arguments to defend the orthodoxy of Chalcedon against those who would accuse it of being Nestorian. Because they didn't condemn the 3 chapters. So people thought it was Nestorian. And because it does talk about 2 natures, and that sounded Nestorian to some people. It's not Nestorian. But here we now have to present arguments to explain why it may sound Nestorian, but it's actually not Nestorian. Okay, if we do that for Chalcedon, why don't we do that for Vatican II? I mean, Vigilius at the Fifth Council, for example, was suspended. Suspended by an ecumenical council. Here come all of the traditional Catholics to the defense of Vigilius to give reasons why, okay, well, this still doesn't go against Vatican I. Okay, I understand. I use those same arguments myself. I make the same arguments. But the point is, you're now having to explain how an ecumenical council can suspend a pope, and yet you don't affirm conciliarism, and you would affirm Vatican I's model of the papacy. I'm not saying you can't do so consistently. I'm not saying that. Again, I do that. I make those arguments. But I'm being consistent because I do it for Nicaea I. I do it for Chalcedon. I do it for the Fifth Council. I do it for all of the ecumenical councils. And then I also do it for Vatican II. I'm being consistent. The traditional Catholics who want to accuse the Second Vatican Council of heresy or just toss it out entirely, they're the ones being inconsistent. And you know why? Because they don't know church history. They don't know what happened with Vigilius. They have never read the Fifth Ecumenical Council or its session suspending him. They've never looked into the issue of the three chapters. They've never looked into any of these things. They just assume, hey, these ecumenical councils, they get a check mark because they came before the Vatican II. But this, on the other hand, no, it doesn't get the check mark. Again, it's based on ignorance. All right, let's but actually go over a paragraph here from this is actually from an Eastern Orthodox bishop. I know I've done an entire show reviewing it a while back, probably a year and a half ago, something like that. But I want to bring it back up and bring out the fact that he notes some discrepancies among the ecumenical councils. These aren't defeaters for the ecumenical councils. Just like us, he believes these ecumenical councils are protected by the Holy Spirit. He affirms the ecumenical councils. He's not attributing error to them. That's not what's going on. Well, he's not attributing error. He would not attribute error to them definitively. He would say that there were some minor errors with them, and that is debatable. But he would still affirm the ecumenical councils and their orthodoxy. Now, whether an ecumenical council can err in non-definitive teachings has been up for debate for quite a while now. For Catholics, that's a lot easier to accept than some Orthodox, though. But the point of me bringing it up, though, is not to get in whether an ecumenical council can teach an error, and I say error here loosely, can teach something that needed to be reversed later on in its non-definitive yet authoritative teachings. I'm not going to engage that right now. My bigger concern is notice the discrepancies, on the surface at least, between these ecumenical councils. And I think it's important because, again, when you read this, you're going to say, well, wait, here, let me explain how this is consistent with Chalcedon. Let me explain here why this is not a contradiction. That's what you're going to do, and that's fine. That's what I do as well. But the point is, if I were a liberal and I were to use this material against you as a Catholic, what would you say in response? You would say, again, well, no, this isn't a contradiction. This isn't a defeater. Here's why these are still ecumenical councils. Here's why they're still guided by the Holy Spirit. Here's how we reconcile them. Notice what you're doing. What you're doing is now giving an interpretation that is consistent with orthodoxy. Why don't you do the same thing for the Second Vatican Council? That's my question. Don't tell me, oh, because of all the stuff behind the scenes going on at Vatican II. Do you know all the stuff that happened behind the scenes at Chalcedon? Do you know all the stuff that happened behind the scenes at the Fifth Council? Do you know all the stuff that happened behind the scenes at Vatican I? We can talk about stuff that happened behind the scenes that will make your stomach turn and will make you question whether or not these ecumenical councils are guided by the Holy Spirit. They really will. Now, I'm not saying they're not. I do believe they are, but they will be challenging to you. If you believe the ecumenical councils are led by the Holy Spirit, go and look into some of their historical aspects. Go and look into the history behind them, and you might start to wonder, how does this work with the Holy Spirit? Okay, but what you're going to do is you're going to look in ways that we could still see God operating and still see orthodoxy. Do that for Vatican II. Do that for Vatican II. That's all I'm saying. Be consistent. Don't do that with the preconciliar councils, but then not with the Second Vatican Council. You're being entirely inconsistent. And at that point, really, you should really re-examine yourself and consider whether or not you really need to remain Catholic at that point. Because if you are able to use that kind of hermeneutic for all these other councils, but you can't do that for the Second Vatican Council, something so fundamentally flawed happened in the post-conciliar era that you really need to ask whether or not your church is indefectible. Now, I believe the Catholic Church is indefectible, and I believe that nothing, that is falsifiable happened at Vatican II. I don't believe anything that at Vatican II falsifies the Catholic Church. I don't believe that. I'm just saying, if you take that position, if you view, the Second Vatican Council as just this radical revolutionary council, you really need to start considering your presuppositions and your perspective. All right, let's look here and see what the Metropolitan says. This is Metropolitan Hilarion Alfayev. He is a Metropolitan now, right? Bishop Hilarion Alfayev. I'm pretty sure he's Metropolitan. Let me go here. Okay. This is page 424 in St. Vladimir's Theological Quarterly, the reception of the ecumenical councils in the early church. There you go. You got the year 2003. And again, we're going to page 424, section 6. Listen to what he says. All right. There is an opinion that the church has no right to return to the acts of the ecumenical councils for reconsideration. Yet history indicates otherwise. For example, when Cyril of Alexandria and John of Antioch signed their formulary of reunion in 433, they were in fact reconsidering the Third Ecumenical Council, rejecting the most extreme features of the Alexandrian Christology which had prevailed there. Now, is he saying that Ephesus is heretical? No, he's not saying that. But he is saying that there were some who were there who were understanding it in a very radical way that could lead to a heretical perspective. So it needs to be interpreted in light of the formula of reunion. In an orthodox fashion. It needs to be interpreted in an orthodox way. You do that with Ephesus. Why don't you do that with Vatican II? The definition of faith for the Fourth Ecumenical Council was based on the formulary of 433, and in this sense, it represented a new stage in Christological development. The Horos of the Fifth Ecumenical Council in turn reinterpreted that of the Fourth Ecumenical Council using the 12 chapters of St. Cyril, in which he spoke against Nestorius and his Christological terminology. Here come all the excuses to defend the Fourth Council, and that's fine. I use them as well. And I'm being a little rhetorical when I say excuses. I understand there are legitimate ways to defend Chalcedon. Believe me, I'm a Chalcedonian. The point is, here come all the reasons to interpret Chalcedon in an orthodox way and not in a heretical fashion. Apply that same energy to Vatican II. Finally, the same Fifth Ecumenical Council considered the theological works by Theodoret of Cyrus and Ebus of Edessa, which means that it reinterpreted the decisions of the Fourth Ecumenical Council concerning these theologians. Right? The whole 3 chapters controversy. What do you do with that? I mean, Theodore was condemned in the Fifth Council, and yet he was friends of saints, of actual saints and church fathers. John Chrysostom, for example. They were buddies. They were good friends. Chalcedon, gives them a pass, pretty much. I mean, there's more to it than that. I understand that. But effectively gives them a pass. The Fifth Council doesn't. What do you do with that? Well, you're going to look for ways to understand this in an orthodox fashion. I understand that. There are arguments to do that. Do the same thing with the Second Vatican Council, or you're entirely inconsistent. And why do you still call yourself a Catholic at that point? I'm not saying Vatican II is perfect, but believe me, some of these other ecumenical councils aren't either. Now, I do think that there are some unique aspects to Vatican II. Sure. There are also some unique aspects to some of the other ecumenical councils. I don't think that Vatican II did as much as it could have to fight against certain problems that were going on in the church and that were going to continue to arise after it. But I can say the same thing about Chalcedon. I mean, I say the exact same thing about Chalcedon. It didn't do enough to fight against Nestorianism. It didn't do enough to make sure that it's going to be understood in a way that is not Nestorian. It didn't do enough. Now, am I just saying it utterly failed in its mission and the Holy Spirit wasn't there? No, it's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying there are some things that could have done better. Otherwise, why did we have the Fifth Ecumenical Council? I can say the same thing of Nicaea I. Otherwise, why did we have the Second Ecumenical Council? If you know just some of the basics of the history of the ecumenical councils, you would see, okay, yeah, sure, there were some things that could have been done better. That doesn't mean we throw them away. That doesn't mean the Holy Spirit wasn't there. That doesn't mean that they don't have dogmatic propositions. That doesn't mean they don't have definitive teachings. That doesn't mean that they weren't protected by the Holy Spirit in those definitive teachings. But it does mean that some things could have been done better. And I can say the same thing about the Second Vatican Council. But I can't attribute heresy to the Second Vatican Council, no more than I could attribute heresy to Chalcedon. So the problem is, as soon as I would try to, if I were a liberal here, if I were going to be, arguing the case for the liberal, I would point to some things in the Fifth Ecumenical Council that would concern you. I would point to some things that in the Fourth Council that would concern you. And I would say, you see, the council failed. There was error here, or there was heresy taught. And what you're going to do is you're going to come and say, no, here's the way to understand it in an orthodox fashion. Again, do the same thing for Vatican II. So this is an appeal to be consistent. It's an appeal to take back the Second Vatican Council. Stop giving it over to the heretics. Stop giving it over to liberal Catholics. Stop giving it over to them as traditional Catholics. Take it back. Recognize it, some deficiencies in it, sure. Recognize where it could have done better, of course. But also admit this thing is not heretical and it is still binding. And interpret it in a way that is in continuity with preconciliar teachings. And if you need some help with that, there's plenty of material to do it. There's plenty of material out there that will help you to understand it in an orthodox fashion. If I found answers, you can too. But I do intend to do some additional episodes on the Second Vatican Council, going over some of the difficult parts of Vatican II and explaining why they are still in line with the preconciliar teachings and why there's no fundamental shift with Vatican II. There's no fundamental change. There's no heresy or something like that. So I still intend to do that. But in the meantime, just dig a little bit deeper. There's plenty of stuff out there. Anyways, I hope this was helpful to y'all. If it was, please let me know in the comment section if you like this. Also, check us out on patreon.com/Reason and Theology if you want to support us. And then also take a look at some of the previous videos we've done on the Second Vatican Council. I went over Lumen Gentium the other day and over paragraphs 14 through 16 and showed why they are not a change or reversal in church teachings. When it comes to outside the church, there is no salvation. So y'all may want to check that out. Anyways, that'll do it for today. See y'all in 40 minutes for the debate. Till next time.